going to call this meeting of the Boardroom Division to order. I'd like to make the following statement, that we are on Treaty 1 territory and it's traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. And my name is Harvey Diamond, and with me right now is Robert Upton, who is to my left. We'll be joined soon by Brent McIntyre, who will be sitting right next to me. My name is Harvey Diamond. Our assistant is Kelsey Harrison. The city assessor is Jamie Forgey. We are going to be hearing applications on the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for revision have to be requested or described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statement that all applicants or the assessor may make at this hearing must be sworn testimony, and everyone speaking must be sworn in. Be advised that our board does not accept comparative assessments, which we do not consider evidence. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by council and is independent of it and the city administration. We make our decisions on the basis of the evidence that we hear, and that alone, and we issue written orders that we mail to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that our decisions received to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Assessment Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to an application for exemption from taxation. And should a party wish to appeal, the method and how to do so will be included with our order. We expect the hearing process and will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions. The applicant may then provide their evidence followed by questions. And I'll give each party an opportunity to summarize if they wish to do so. Once the evidence and application has been brought forward, the party may leave. The person will repeat for each matter on the docket. And after all the applications have been heard, we will be closing this hearing and we will deliver it in private. We will issue our written order of our mail as soon as possible, and all information at all public hearings is live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. Before swearing in, I'll just indicate that I understand that there are 4 matters that have been agreed to. Since we're waiting for Mr. McIntyre, we'll proceed with those matters first and deal with them. So hopefully Mr. McIntyre will be here before the first contested matter, and we'll split parties in, Kelsey. Thank you.
Would you like to swear in or affirm?
I'll swear in.
Could you please state your name?
Jamie Fougere.
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Would you like to swear in or affirm with us? Could you please state your name?
Kenneth Thomas Leslie.
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'll be quick. Apologize to Mr. Forshee, but mispronouncing your name.
Oh, that's very much okay. It's rarely gotten on the first try, so.
Well, I'll try to remember for the next try. Okay.
No problem.
And I'll let you set the agenda. We'll deal with the matters first that have been agreed to because we don't know what they are.
Right.
So you can tell me which matter you'd like to be brought forward first.
Sure. So actually, we could do them sequentially, starting with number 4.
Okay.
So 4 to 7 has been agreed to, and
okay.
If it's okay with you, once we do those ones, maybe we can start at number 1.
That'll be fine. So let's deal with number 4 first then,
Sure.
which is 1717 Pembina Highway.
1717 Pembina Highway. The roll number is 0306556100, and our assessed value is $7,425,000. And my understanding is that Mr. Leslie is in agreement with the original assessment.
Okay. Do you want to go through the numbers anyway, just
Sure.
for the record? So I guess what I'll take you to is your workout up on page 4.
Yeah.
You make your workout.
So we've considered this a neighborhood shopping center, and if you wanted to see the property real quick, pictures begin on page 9. It has the Value Village, as well as the Napa Auto Parts up front. And so we have a range from as low as $831 for the Value Village, up to $1713 $18.50 for one of the inline CRUs. So the total leasable area that we have is 51,736, and the potential rent is 593,747. So, and we've used standard neighborhood shopping center parameters here: 4% vacancy, expenses of 2% other, and a shortfall rate of $8 per square foot, and the capitalization rate that we've utilized for this property is 7.3, giving us a total value of $7,425,000.
Mr. Rep, do you have any questions on this matter?
I don't have any questions.
Okay, I don't either. Okay, that's fine. So we proceed on with the next matter then, which would be item number 5, which is the Moore Center, 1371 McPhillips Street.
So does Mr. Leslie need to verbally acknowledge that he's in agreement with the value?
Well, actually, I think he did by silence, but
Okay.
if you are,
I'm in a,
yes.
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
1717 penalty, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the next one is 1371 McPhillips. They actually have a recommendation on this one.
Okay.
So I've printed a copy for each of you.
If you pass that, that'd be great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I guess there will be an extra one there.
Oh.
Thank you. So the address is 1371 McPhillips. The roll number is 110407620000. And just to identify the property, we have pictures starting on page 9. So this property is on McPhillips here, just before Northgate. And so we've revised our original assessment, and you can see on the recommendation, in fact, the only thing that's changed on the first sheet, which represents the neighborhood shopping center stream, is 12% vacancy. And that's predominantly due to the fact that Sport Check has vacated the property.
Okay, so it's reflecting the actual situation
Right.
rather than the city's ordinary parameters.
Right, that's right. Yeah, so we've actually, our original assessment was adequate for predicting the NOI, but with the exception of this large vacancy. So through our vacancy guidelines, we've recommended 12% vacancy. And then on the second stream is the Domo. That's at the front of the property. And that's the second page of my recommendation.
Okay.
And here we've actually matched the cap rate for the gas station to the neighborhood shopping center.
Okay.
And that's the only change there as well.
Okay.
So the revised amount that we're proposing is $8,822,000. And that's down from $9,886,000.
Okay, and that's with the 2 streams.
Right.
Okay. And I see how you did that. Any questions, Mr. Upton?
None for me, no thank you.
And Mr. Leslie, you're in agreement with this?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and I have no questions either, so thank you.
Thank you.
That's just information. now we're on item number 6, which is 1853 McPhillips Street. When you're ready, Mr. Curry.
Yes, sir. So we're just now a property south of the last that we had. So the address here is 1353 McPhillips Street. The roll number is 1407-1488-100. And so the original assessment that we have is $1,307,000. And my understanding is that Mr. Leslie is in agreement with this assessment as well, the original assessment. And to get a sense of where the property is located, you can see on page 8. And then we have some Google Street View photographs on page 9. And if you turn to page 4, you get an overview of the workup for this strip mall property. So the rents range from $13.36 up to $20.21. $20.21 is a restaurant. The total leasable area that we have is 7,124. The total potential rent that we have is 115,334. We're using strip mall parameters here with a 4% vacancy, 2% expense, and $7 square foot shortfall. And this particular strip mall has received an 8.15 capitalization rate.
Okay. And you're in agreement with this, Mr. Leslie?
Yes, sir.
Any questions, Mr. Upton?
No question.
My only question is, why is there an 8 and a 0.15% cap on this one when the others are at 7.3?
So this property here is actually a strip mall.
Yes.
So it's a different property type than some of the other ones.
Okay, so
on the
city
docket.
parameters, would they have an 8.15 on the strip mall?
City parameters, we've also, I believe this may be a property that has an investment rank lower than some of the other ones. So it has less, the covenant of the tenants may be a little bit less strong. And so that may be part of the consideration for the cap rate.
And I actually, I know you're using the model in this anyway, it's not a
Yes.
recommendation, so obviously the computer did determine that this was feasible.
Yeah, with the guidance of an assessor, but yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and the last matter that there's an agreement on would be 3045 Ness Avenue, and when you're ready to proceed.
So I also have a recommendation on this.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you can take us through this,
Yeah, so the address here is 3045 Ness Avenue. The roll number is 074383000400. And you can see the photographs on page 9 and 10. So this is a older style Safeway with an adjoining strip mall. The vintage is approximately the 60s. It was a very dated property. It has since been purchased, and they have demolished the building, and so it's actually a site that's clean and clear at this point. So the photographs that you're looking at really just show you what was there and gives you a sense of where the site is. So it's being developed, it will be developed for multifamily buildings, is my understanding. And as a result, we've referred to sales of multifamily vacant land, multifamily zone vacant land, I should say. So you can see on page 3, we have a list of comparables. And this is what we've referred to for our recommendation. As well with the knowledge of the post-reference sale, we were able to look at the reclassification of the vacant land, which brings us again into this range, as well as the support of the vacant land sale comparables. So on the recommendation, we're proposing a value of $1,538 across the 139,290 square feet of the property. And that shows a value of $2,142,280. And I'm going to actually ask you to refer to your picture again on page 9, because I have made a further deduction from that value. So closer to Ness in the west, there's a small piece joining the back lane. Then the back lane is called Pebblewood Lane. There's a small piece there that was included as part of the sale. So that has a separate assessment, and because that has a separate assessment, we don't want to count it twice, you know, when
Right.
considering the sale. So we've deducted that value from the main assessment. So that's the deduction there, 104,000.
I mean, 104 is assessed on another roll.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And so that leaves us with a total value of $2,038,000.
That's fine, thank you. Any questions,
None for me, thank you.
And that's satisfactory to the applicant, Mr. Leslie?
We are in agreement.
Okay, so we'll have a recommendation here, thank you. Okay, so this completes the recommendations, and we're back to item 1. And I have no knowledge of when Mr. McIntyre is going to get here. And for expediency, I think we should maybe start with number 1 then, and wait till Mr. McIntyre can join us when he gets here. So just give me a minute. Okay, so the next matter then would be Portage Square, which is located at 1881 Portage Avenue. And you can proceed when you're ready.
So I again have a recommendation on this property.
Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the address is 1881 Portage Avenue. The roll number is 0704-111-2000. And as mentioned, I have a recommendation.
Right.
But maybe before I get to that, we'll familiarize ourselves with the property.
Okay.
You can see starting on page 9, that's a overhead view of the parcel outlines. You can see that there's a easement through the center of the property. And you can see photographs on page 10, as well as 11 and 12. So we have basically two strip malls, one strip mall, Tim Hortons pad site, a domo, as well as a grocery store at the rear. And so with my recommendation, what I am proposing is keeping all the parameters the same, with one exception, which I'll get to in a moment. But on the first page here, the rents that we've used are the actuals of the property. So on the first page of the recommendation is the neighborhood shopping center stream. And that includes everything except for the gas station. And so we have suggested using the actual rents from the property. And then on the second page, you can see the domo. And we've used the actual rent with the parameters for a gas station from the city: 2% vacancy, $6 shortfall, 2% other. But in this case, we've matched the cap rate. So the change on the first stream is that we've used the actual rents. The change on the second stream is that we've matched the cap rate from the neighborhood shopping center stream. And we've used the actual rent. At the bottom here, you can see there is 61,000 just below the calculated market value here, 61,000. That represents the gas equipment.
What page are you on here?
Sorry, I'm on this. I'm
On
sorry.
the recommendation.
I'm on the second page of the recommendation.
Second page?
Right. And so that 61,000 is the
Right.
equipment costs for the gas station, which was included in our original assessment. And so my understanding is that we're fairly close with our values, but we're not quite there. So just to sort of illustrate where we're coming from, I'm just going to turn to the through the income statement at the back
Okay, what page are you on?
on page 19.
Okay.
So here it begins with the rental income of the property at the top, totaling $449,917.56. And then they have recovery adjustments, which is from the previous year when they haven't estimated correctly. Some other revenue, and then it comes down to the expenses. And if you continue on page 20, the expenses continue until you reach page 21. And so on page 21, you can see their net income for the property. And so this is for the income year 2017. So the total income that the property brought in was $474,804. And so if you look at our net operating income, requires a little bit of math here, but $375,931. That's from the first page of our recommendation. And then you add the $36,435 from the second page of our recommendation. And I believe that the total is approximately $411,000. And so when compared to the $474,000, we think that we're being fair with our net operating income. And so the only other change, if we don't adjust the net operating income, would be potentially with the capitalization rate. And so we've used the city parameters for this capitalization rate. And on page 7 of our brief, we have the reported ranges for various retail property types. So this is a neighborhood shopping center.
I apologize.
Right?
Email I got said the Friday hearing was canceled, but I didn't. So my wife said you have no hearing this Friday. I said okay.
But I didn't email you that, right?
No, but it's Friday the 18th,
Oh, Friday the 18th.
and I didn't expect to
Okay.
get that much notice.
So we're dealing with number 1 on the agenda. Before we have some other ones that we're piecing agreed with.
Okay.
This is the first one that isn't, so you can catch on pretty quickly. Do we have the recommendation available that?
I do. So is he able to
Well, I think,
participate in the decision?
well, we'll see how he feels when he.
Okay.
Okay, so this one, the city is still giving their presentations based on a recommendation.
Okay.
Okay, I'm not gonna ask it to be repeated, but maybe by going over this, you probably get it pretty quickly.
Yep.
And then we'll hear the applicants as well.
I can summarize quickly the
Yeah.
recommendation as
Okay,
well
go
at
over it
the
again
end.
quickly, sure.
So as mentioned, we've used the neighborhood shopping center capitalization rate from our model, from our parameters. And we've actually gone so far as to match it for the gas kiosk as well. So prior to this, the original assessment would have had an overall blended cap that was, I believe it was 7.73.
Okay, so you're
So-
close.
So it's close, but we've gone ahead and matched it out of consistency regardless. And so the retail neighborhood shopping center cap rates on page 7, between the 20th and 80th percentile, our data shows that the capitalization rates for neighborhood shopping center are between 7.15 and 7.3. And so really any adjustments to that would be due to age, location, and things of that nature.
Right, and in this case, you've got higher than the 80th percent.
Right, yeah, we have 7.8. And specific to this property type, the only major real estate company that's reported capitalization rates is CBRE, and there's a reported 6.5 to 7. The next closest would probably be a strip mall, or if it were on a neighborhood shopping center on the larger side, you could potentially consider a community shopping center, both of which actually have lower cap rates. And anecdotally, I can say from reviewing sales mailers that the reported cap rates from individual sales are within that range. So in my opinion, the 7.8% cap rate is fair. And again, we've used the actuals for the rental rates.
Right.
And I've walked you through how the net operating income reported from the property is actually much higher.
We saw it.
But we've kept the deductions for vacancy and shortfall and other as well. So
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. If you have any questions in the session, you can ask them now, Mr. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fougere, we've had a discussion about the subject property. And your revised assessment and recommendation of 5348, is it fair to say that the difference is really the cap rate?
I haven't seen your revised workup yet, but I think that sounds, through discussions, it sounds like that's the biggest.
Our discussions were on cap rate and why should the Domo gas bars have a lower cap rate in your recommendation, you've now streamed them equally, correct?
Correct.
And the rate is 7.8%.
Correct.
And in my brief, just, I've used 8%.
Right.
And when I make my submission, I'll,
And we'll let you do that when you make your submission, and your
I'll
questions
show
will
the
be
difference.
listed.
I think you mentioned that, in your brief, this is an older property. I see on page 1, the year actual built was 1964, is that correct?
Correct.
Are you aware that the original building built on this property was a Safeway?
Correct. Yes.
So this is a conversion to, and what classification are we calling it?
Neighborhood shopping center.
Not other property.
Sorry?
I see on your classification on page 1, it says other property.
That is the classification through the charter, I believe, or the Municipal Assessment Act for commercial property. So that's just a code that refers to legislation. But in terms of the property type that we're describing as a neighborhood shopping center, but the 60 other is a classification for percentages as they relate to the taxes.
And you, I believe you mentioned that the higher cap rate was to reflect the age and location of the property, is that correct?
In part, yes, yeah. So there's a few variables potentially that go into how the cap rate is determined.
And then the second date, 1987, would that have been when the Domo was added?
I don't actually know specifically which building that would be referencing. My understanding is the rest of the site is probably vintage at about the 80s, sometime in the 80s.
So overall, this is an older property in an older area of the city.
I don't know if it's
60s.
originally built in the 60s. It's been maintained and updated and is suitable for the tenancy and is reflective in the rates that they're achieving at the property for the rental rates, which we're happy to use for the income. Those dates, like I say, the rest of the property, my understanding that it was vintage in the 80s. I think that's probably would describe a lot of properties in the city. So relative to those, I don't know if it's particularly old.
Would the higher cap rate for the Domo gas bar reflect sort of what's going on in the marketplace these days?
So we're happy to match the capitalization rates for the Domo gas bar, to say this is one economic unit, and we're trying to recognize that. Can you expand on your question?
I guess it's fair to say that climate change is the most prevalent topic in the marketplace these days, and investors looking at, because ultimately what we're trying to determine here is what a willing buyer would pay a willing seller. Do you think that there's a lot less willing buyers for properties that are impacted by climate change?
I would be speculating, but I would suggest no.
So the significant downturn in the energy market wouldn't affect an investor's interest in investing in a property that.
I don't think you can make that argument. I don't think the assessor is capable of giving investment advice. He's an assessor on the property, and you can make that argument certainly, Mr. Leslie, but I don't think that question is going to assist you.
Okay, no, that's fine.
And if I may, like, I haven't seen anything in the marketplace or otherwise to suggest that there's any impact.
Well, that's
currently.
not your expertise area, so I
Yeah.
don't know if that's
Agreed.
really a helpful answer either.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So your workup is really, you use the actuals, applied the methodology. It excludes any deduction for management because management is included in the leases, and then applied a standard cap rate of 7.8% for the income stream, plus $61,000 for the equipment,
Correct.
to get a revised value of $5,348,000.
Correct.
Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Upton, do you have any questions of the assessor?
Not at this point, I think it's quite clear, I'll wait for Mr.
Yeah,
Leslie.
okay. And Mr.
No
Madden?
questions.
And I don't either.
No.
So Mr. Leslie, you can go ahead. I think we're basically doing a cap rate on this,
Right, and I have revised my,
okay?
Yep.
So it's a whole new brief or just an addition? addendum?
it's just, I have, through discussions with Mr. Fougere yesterday, I have revised my amounts.
So basically what you're doing is, I think, from your question, you're looking for an 8% cap rate.
I'm looking for,
Otherwise, so I guess you can leave your argument to the basis of why we should give you an 8% cap rate rather than include the city 7.8,
that's correct.
okay?
And that my handout is really is showing the math. I use the numbers, the actual revenue that the property was earning. That is on page 5 of the supplemental. I've deleted the 5% management. Well, actually, to start again, I've used the actual revenues earned, and I've combined them rather than two streams. I've used the vacancy allowance of 4%, same as the assessor. Vacancy shortfall at $7.50 a square foot. I've deleted the management 5% deduction because it's included in the leases now. That's something that I think on all new leases seem to be written after 2016. That's what we're seeing. I included deduction for 2%, and I've capped that stream at 8% plus an amount for the equipment, and I've arrived at a value of 5.2 million. And so the difference, when I do the math, the difference of 5.2 million to the assessor's 5,384 is that 148,000 is really the 2% cap, 0.02% cap rate.
Okay.
Between the 7, 8, and 8. On page 5 of my brief and the supplemental, this is a matter that has come before the Board of Revision, and consistently every year, and I've always used 8%. This is a property that's located across from the St. James Collegiate, originally built in 1964. There was a strip added along the western edge. There's a Domo gas bar at the front and a Tim Hortons pad Suffice to say that parking and access in the egress is a significant issue on this particular property. And I do believe that, and I have seen it, that the banks will not finance gas stations. And investors now, because of the prevalence of the discussion of climate change, I think the long-term prospects for properties that are in this situation are faced with the issues of and whether the environmental issue or not, you are faced with the risk of the environmental issue from having the domo on your site. So there, I think any purchaser or any lender looking at this particular property is going to look at those costs in order to ultimately having to remediate the site. And I think that additional costs, that if we can just look at the difference between the two assessed values, 5.2 is my submission, and the assessor's revised is $5,384,000. So $184,000. I can tell from experience that property is not going to be remediated for $184,000. And so any purchaser looking to buy this property is going to factor that in. That what are the costs, because at some point in the future, there is going to be a remediation issue. The major chartered banks have said, because there is case law that says if the landlord doesn't have the wherewithal to pay the cost of remediation, then the secured creditor will pay the cost of remediation. And most recently, there has been a major decision that's come out of Alberta where they're looking at the energy companies for paying the cost of remediation. And if the energy company has gone bankrupt, then they're looking at the lender. And in that case, it was Alberta Treasury who had financed that energy company. They're looking at those, and so I think though that issue does impact. I think buyers are aware of it, and so is $184,000 a reasonable estimate of the future cost of remediation that a buyer is going to look at? I think that's more than reasonable. That's my submission.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicant?
Yeah. So the difference, just for clarity, would you agree the difference between our submissions is 148,000, not 184?
Oh,
just
I've
for clarity.
Typical accountant, I've transposed the numbers, yes.
Okay. And the lease for the Domo goes to April 2025, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you've used the capitalization rate of 8% for the 2014 assessment, the 2016 assessment, the 2018 assessment. Is that correct?
That was my submission, yes.
And so you're using it again here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you have any cap rate evidence? Any market evidence of cap rates?
No.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Upton, do you have any questions?
Only on the cap rate information you have and how you determined it, and that's been answered. You don't have a calculation or evidence for 8%?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mackey, do you have any
No
questions?
questions.
Okay, I guess I got a couple. First of all, you indicated that there's an environmental risk, and I'm wondering, has there been a phase 1, phase 2, or any other environmental reports done on this property?
I'm not aware of that.
So we don't know that there is actually even a problem. There might be a potential problem, because not necessarily every gas tank leaks and causes contamination. Until you do a phase study, you really don't know if this property's been impacted or not, do you?
Well, I don't know that, and I'm not aware of there ever, I can tell you from experience, they do monitor the amount of gasoline that's delivered to a site and the amount of gasoline that comes out of the pumps. I can also tell you from personal experience, some people spill gasoline on the ground.
Sometimes they do, yeah. Not how much of it gets into the ground, depending on what the surface area is
But
up to conjecture.
on any sale of the subject property, there would have to be an environmental review.
If it's being financed by a bank or a credit union, they would require that before they could afford, put a mortgage on it.
And that environmental review has a cost attached to it. And
Well, it might only be a phase one, which is not expensive. Once there's a phase one, if it's satisfactory, they may not go to a phase two, where they actually drill and determine what the situation is.
that's correct, but there will be a cost.
Okay. And as far as climate change, are you saying that, is that part of your argument that people are gonna be using less gasoline in the future because they're gonna have battery-operated cars, and therefore gas stations are gonna become basically like buggy whip manufacturers eventually? And so people are less like to invest in them now?
Will they convert them to hydrogen gas stations?
Or maybe charging stations, who knows?
Charging stations, I don't know, but I believe the marketplace has already spoken as to the future for gas and oil.
Well, I don't know if it has in Canada yet, because I don't think we have batteries that are really feasible for winter
No, I'm not talking,
usage.
I'm not talking about what's gonna happen in the future.
Yeah.
But the appetite for investments in anything that's connected to oil and gas has been diminished.
And your basis for making that argument is?
I think it's public knowledge.
Well,
The
actually,
mark-
still the basis, like public knowledge, what do you mean by that? I know that people who invest in oil and gas companies have certainly not done well lately, but I think a lot of that is because with fracking, they found so many more supplies of gasoline that there's a lot more on the market now than there had been. Not necessarily that people are using less.
I'll go back to my original argument that what a willing buyer will pay a willing seller.
Okay.
Will the willing buyer recognize a discount because of the environmental risk associated with having a gas station on the site?
Okay.
And so,
Okay.
and in this case, we've actually quantified that risk of $148,000.
So you're saying a willing buyer will say, no, I'm not gonna accept a 7.8% cap rate, I demand an 8% cap rate before I'm gonna buy this. That's your basis of your argument?
Yes,
And you don't have any evidence, just conjecture though, to establish that?
yes.
And maybe that might be in the future, but how can you say that that was as of the date of this
Well,
assessment?
actually, I do have evidence of that, because we refer to a sale of 3045 Ness Avenue. 3045 Ness Avenue was coincidentally also a Safeway with a strip center on the site. The property was sold, subject to demolition. In the course of the demolition, they identified it as an environmental risk. The additional cost of remediation for the environmental risk, and in that case, there wasn't a gas station on the site. The gas station is on an adjacent site.
Okay.
The cost of remediation was estimated to be $150,000. That's a fact.
Okay.
And I became aware of that evidence this summer.
Okay, but we don't know that in this case there has been contamination from the underground tanks or from surface either. You've already indicated.
I'm not aware of an environmental study, and I'm not but for there to be a risk to be associated with the property, because that's what the cap rate really is
For sure.
intended to do, is to reflect the risk. The fact that you've got a gas station on the site, that risk just exists. At the very least, there'll be a phase one.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Thank you, Mr. Leslie. Okay, so we'll make a decision on this. We'll vote. So we're now going to item 2 on the agenda, which shall be 1074 St. Mary's Road. And you can see when you're ready.
For this property, I again have a recommendation.
Thanks, that's me.
Thank you.
Okay, and you can proceed again when you're ready to do so.
So the property is 1074 St. Mary's Road. The roll number is 0800380650. I'll just start with the recommendation. So I've used the actuals from the property. So the first line that you see there is the Pizza. The second line is a Dollarama, and the third is an A&W. And to get a view of it, you can turn to page 9. Page 9 shows you where it is, located off of St. Mary's Road in Dunkirk. Page 10, the bottom picture is a Google Street View shot, and up top is a overhead shot showing the two buildings there. The 1070 is actually another property, so that's not discussed today. But 1074 at the rear and 1078, which is the A&W at the front. So this was previously a Blockbuster video. Again, you can see on page 11 more contemporary photos of the property. And I'm just going to turn to page 18. So they've actually reported this property with the two buildings separately, but I do want to note on page 18, this is one of the buildings with the rent, the base rent at $134,700, and then you can see after recoveries and expenses on page 19, that's $147,421. And then on page 20, you can see the base rent is $100,464, and after recoveries and expenses, the net income for that building is $102,780. And so if you add up the $102,780 with the $147,421, you get approximately $250,000, $249 something, I believe. Or yeah, approximately $250,000. But regardless, if you look at our recommendation, the net operating income that we've used is $217,957. So roughly 35,000 less than the actual net operating income for the 2017 IE year. So the reason for that is we've used the vacancy allowance. This property doesn't have any vacancy. We've used shortfall as well as 2% other as deductions. And so that's why we're actually lower than the net operating income that was reported. We've also, for the purposes of this recommendation, I've changed the parameters to neighborhood shopping center. So that's to reflect that this site, there's multiple buildings, different types of tenants, the large Dollarama, the inline CRU, which is Pizza in this case, and then the pad site of A&W. And so with the change of the parameters, it actually raises the cap rate up. And so the overall cap rate changes to 7.15 for this given property. We've also used the 4% cap, which the original assessment, I believe, had 3 and 6. And then an $8 shortfall, which is up from the $650 and the $750 that were previously assessed. And just for background, we had this assessed as a retail store and a standalone restaurant. So at this point, we've combined it into one stream, and we're calling it a neighborhood shopping center. And therefore, that's why we're using these parameters here. And so the recommendation is for a value of $3,048,000.
Thank you. Mr. Leslie, any questions of the assessor?
Yes. So the cap rate you've used and you've combined it is 7.15?
Correct.
And what would have been, but it's now changed to a neighborhood shopping center?
That's my recommendation, yes.
And what was it before?
So we call them a PUC, property use code. That's an internal designation. So these hearings are grouped by parcel use codes, property use codes. And so it was called a commercial neighborhood shopping center. Yeah, that's what it was labeled. But the income stream parameters that we had on it was, you can see on our page 6, was a retail stream, and that was for the Dollarama and the Pizza. And so a retail store is what that's to describe, and then a standalone restaurant for the stream 2. And so I believe it's more apt to call this a neighborhood shopping center. And that's what I'm recommending.
Does that result in a lower cap rate?
It actually results in a higher cap rate. So the blended cap rate, you can see on page 6, the far left column was 6.96, and that's because the restaurant had a lower cap, but the retail store had a higher cap. So if you can think of these classifications in terms of, well, standalone restaurant versus, with adequate parking versus a retail store, which is sort of storefront typically, and no off-site parking, on-site parking.
So on page 4 of your submission, the cap rate for the Pizza and the Dollarama is 7.75 originally.
Correct.
And the A&W.
So the overall capitalization rate
was originally
was
6.35.
Right. So the original overall capitalization rate was a blended rate of 6.96. Separately, one capitalization rate was lower, one capitalization rate was higher. We're proposing using 7.15, so effectively the capitalization rate has gone up.
19 basis points.
But it's the effect of the A&W that's really lowered, what you're saying has lowered the rate, that A&W.
In the original assessment, yes.
And, but still.
So the,
Retail strips are 7.75 in the model?
that's what this particular retail store was, but I don't believe that this is a retail store. I think it's more akin to a neighborhood shopping center. Retail store, typically the way we've utilized it in our model are for properties that don't have parking lots. So a retail store on Main Street, skate shop down the road here has no parking lot. That is what we would describe as a retail store. This has a parking lot. And it, in fact, also has another building on the site as well. So I think it's more accurate to describe it as a whole, since it's one roll number, as neighborhood shopping center.
Would the restaurants typically have a lower cap rate?
Typically in our model they do,
Standalone restaurant?
standalone restaurants.
Why?
That's the information that we get back from our analysis of sales in the marketplace and determining capitalization rates through sale prices and net operating incomes.
Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Leslie. Mr. Upton, do you have any questions of the assessor?
You want to treat this as one economic unit. That's why you have one cap rate for two.
Correct.
So they didn't do, you're saying it would not be, well, it could be subject to subdivision, but it's one economic unit. Somebody's going to buy the parcel containing both of these entities.
Right. And in my opinion, this probably would not be a good candidate for a subdivision. If you look at the overhead with the location of the entrances and exits and given, it's not a very large parking lot, so I would see it as unlikely to be subdivided, but that's our position.
Okay, and so you took your cap rate from your page 7 as an economic, as a neighborhood shopping center. And the 20th percentile is 715?
Correct.
So that's what you use, 715?
Correct.
Okay, I think that's all I have right now, thank you.
Thank you.
I have one question relating to the cap rate. If you turn to page 7, the difference between the 20th and 80th percentile is 0.15%. What makes this shopping center 7.15?
I think the age. So the way that the analysis is done is the age of the property, obviously the type, in this case neighborhood shopping center, the size. We have a smaller threshold for size that would affect the cap rate. So this is a model generated capitalization rate for this property.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question that's the obvious, just to get it on the books for clarification. So your recommendation is based on, which has reduced the actually overall assessment, is based on using a cap rate of 7.15% being your neighborhood shopping center cap rate rather than a lower 6.3, which would have given you a combined 6.96 rather than a 7.5.
Right.
And you use actual rents rather than model rent.
Correct.
to drive at your recommendation.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Leslie? You can bring forward your argument?
I have revised mine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then on my page 5 of the revised submission, I've handwritten the changes to the methodology to calculate the assessment. And the two changes is that on one of the leases, they're not recovering the management fee in the county taxes. And I believe in the assessor's model, there is no deduction for management. And I'm using the assessor's original cap rate of 7.75% on the Dollarama Pizza rather than the number for the A&W, to arrive at a value of $2,747,000. That number that's hard to read is the net operating, revised net operating income is $212,889. Which achieves a value of $2,746,955, rounded to 2747. I don't think this is a neighborhood shopping center. We've got 3 tenants. I think the reason for lower cap rates for neighborhood shopping centers is because you spread the risk amongst a number of leases. I'm going to rely on what the department used for a strip center, which was 7.75, and submit. I don't have any information to support that other than what the assessor has submitted, but that's the number I've used. I do show that in the past, the rate previously for 2016 reference year was 8%, and for 2014 reference year was 8.5%. That's just for information purposes, but those were board decisions. Why would the cap rate be lower for a restaurant, particularly a fast food restaurant, A&W? I don't know. A&W, you're dealing with a multinational corporation that is going to grind you on the rate. Your costs are probably directly related to minimum wage, which continues to go up. So I keep going back to what a willing buyer is going to pay a willing seller, and the willing buyer is going to look at the tenants on the marketplace in the property and try to determine what is the appropriate cap rate in order to determine the price they're going to pay. I still think this is a retail strip. You've only got 3 tenants. Sure, there's adequate parking. That's fortunate, particularly when you have 2 restaurants. And that's my submission.
Thank you very much. Questions of the applicant?
Yes, please. So you'd mentioned you were going back to the capitalization rate for the retail strip. So for clarification, are you aware that the capitalization rate that we were using wasn't for a strip mall? It was for a retail store? Just for clarifications.
I wasn't aware of that.
Okay.
I was just relying on the rate that the department used in its first workup on the.
Right. Okay. And you had mentioned that one of the tenants wasn't paying their management recovery until, and my understanding is that we had actually looked closer and saw that we were misreading the income and expense questionnaire. Is that correct? You recall that conversation?
When I looked at the rent roll, it appeared that they didn't start paying the management fee recovery until 2019.
Okay, so we'll take a look though. If you want, you can take a look on the I&E in my brief. So this is the 2017 income and expense questionnaire. So if you turn to page 16, so we can see Pizza, the top line on the far right hand side, shows a total of $1374.65, and then below that Dollarama shows a total of $2,978, and then on the next page A&W shows a total of $3,300. Then if you look on page 18, the management fee recovery shows $4,352.64, which I believe that's a combination of $1374 and $2978. And then on page 20, so if you remember, they separate the buildings with their reporting here.
Right.
Their management recovery on page 20 is the last remaining $3,300. So it looks like they're all paying management currently, or at the reference date at a minimum. And furthermore, the net operating income that we're suggesting that we use, $217,957, is still lower than their combined net operating income of $250,000 approximately.
You're asking a question, but you're making a statement. If you, this is a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
sorry,
what she was
I got a little bit
listening.
carried away. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So my question was, were you aware that both, all the tenants actually paid management? I apologize.
Right, and I will confirm, we had this discussion, and so if you refer to my revised submission on page 5, for management 5%, I originally had the number of $11,243. And from that, I tried to deduct what I thought they were actually recovering in management, because I don't think it's actually 5%, it's something less. And so I penciled in $35.91. That's the difference between 5% and what they're actually recovering. That's what I tried to do. So Mr. Fougere and I did have that conversation, and so I tried to and he pointed me to
Okay,
those
so clarify what you did, that's fine.
So I did try to reflect that because not in all leases are you seeing the landlord able to obtain the 5%. Sometimes it's less, sometimes depending on the tenant, it's nothing. And so the methodology has always been to include a 5% management deduction. And what I've seen in the assessor's briefs is that deduction is going away because the landlord is recovering that, so we can't claim the deduction twice, and I accept that. And so the difference is what I believe between 5% and what
Okay,
was not recovered.
that's answering the question to you. Okay, do you have any other questions?
No, I think
Okay, Mr. Upton, do you have any questions of the applicant?
Yes, on this 5% you're speaking of, I understand that management fees do not totally recover everything that the landlord has to put out in the way of other expenses. And the 5% issued by the city originally was to include not only direct management, but things like advertising or sign expense or things like that that are not normally recovered by the landlord. Is that correct? Is that why you're 5%? You're saying that in the management fee shown does not recover the total expenses of the landlord.
What I tried to do was calculate what 5% of the amount after the vacancy allowance that's allowed.
Why should they get the 5% when they're recovering management? You say there are other factors in there.
What I was saying is that they're not, the past methodology was they were allowed a notional deduction for 5%. Whether that 5% actually recovered all the expenses or not, in past reference years, that deduction was being allowed.
Right, exactly.
But what you're seeing now in current leases is that the property manager, in addition to CAM and taxes, is charging a fee for management of as much as 5%. And what I'm saying in this particular instance, they don't appear to be recovering the full 5%. Are there other expenses that the landlord is not covered by that 5%? I agree, that's probably true. But I think it was accepted between, in the decisions, that in previous reference years, that 5% was a notional deduction without regard to what the actual expenses were.
Yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying. So, yeah.
But, for example, you might have a tenant who has a long-term lease, and the long-term lease does not includes a contribution to CAM and taxes based on audited financial statements. But there's nothing in the lease that says that they have to pay 5% for management.
No, no.
I believe the landlord should still get the deduction, because the buyer is going to, if they're going to have to eat that cost of managing the property, then they're gonna factor it into the purchase price.
So historically, they always receive the 5%, and your argument is they should continue to receive the 5%.
In this situation, the 5% has been ground by what they actually received,
Right,
is
okay.
what I'm trying to.
5%
That
less.
was our discussion yesterday, and Mr. Fougere pointed me to those pages, and I acknowledged it, and so when I did my revised workup, I reduced it by an amount that I thought what I could see from the statement that they actually received.
Yeah. The difference between what they actually received and the 5% is what you're referring to here. Yeah. Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Mr. McIntyre, any questions?
Are these long-term leases?
Are these ones?
Or are they recently negotiated?
I believe in my original submission, I've provided copies of
of the rent roll on the last 2 pages.
Oh, yes.
And you can see for the A&W, I've got $3,300 for management. Well, $3,300 on net rent of $100,000 is not 5%. It's 3.3%. And so you're gonna have a difference.
Okay. The other question was, in your opinion, what are the quality of these tenants?
Pizza Pizza, Dollarama, and A&W are national accounts.
Okay, no, that was all.
Thank you. I have no questions, thank you.
Can I have just a very, very brief summation?
You can.
So I just
Mr.
want-
Leslie will be entitled to the same opportunity, but go ahead.
Sure. So I just wanted to remind that the recommendation that we have, the net operating income, is approximately $35,000 less than the net operating income less non-recoverable expenses. So even though the calculation from the income and expense questionnaires includes non-recoverable items, we are still $35,000 less than the net operating income reported to us. So whether or not we fully recovered a nominal 5%, which I don't know the decisions of why a company would choose 3% or 5%, but I would suggest that's the business decision. The point is they've recovered all of the management that they're accounting for fully, since it's balanced in their income and expense questionnaire. So regardless, the bottom line is we're below on the net operating income. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Leslie, would you like to make a final summation?
The methodology affords, and I think Mr. Fougere spoke to it, affords a notional deduction for vacancy and vacancy allowance. And Mr. Fougere confirmed it, and I think we both confirmed this property is 100% occupied. But a prudent buyer, when they're buying the property, and then the methodology allows that factor in for a notional vacancy and a notional vacancy allowance. The risk associated with this particular property is if we have a vacancy, we only have 3 tenants. And so if the head of A&W decides that actually it's a company controlled out of, I believe, South America, decides that A&W is not performing because of its location and goes dark, then we have $100,000 of rent, that, not the notional amount, that is. The reason I bring that up is that's why the actual income is higher with recoveries than what's in the methodology. Because there's these notional deductions that a buyer is going to take into account for vacancy and vacancy allowance. And that's the accepted methodology. The actual rents are used because the actual rents approximate what the marketplace is paying. In fact, I think the rents are probably higher than what we're seeing in the marketplace. What I've relied on, I think we're talking about the same thing, virtually the same numbers. The issue is the cap rate. Is the buyer going to use a cap rate of 7.15, or are they going to use 7.75, which was the cap rate the department used for the Pizza and the Dollarama?
Okay, we've heard this and we're,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's, but I think I needed to explain why the actual is,
No, although you didn't answer Mr. what the assessor said, and that was that, looking at your statements, in and out, where they're saying the management expenses shown in your statements, management recovery said, were fully recovered. And it wasn't a 5% cost on one hand, and you got full recovery. I think that's what he said. Okay, and you didn't respond to that.
and I thought I had responded to it with respect to the A&W. The methodology was that there was a notional deduction for 5%.
Okay.
Whether the actual management expenses, insurance, all the other things equaled 5%, or maybe it was more. It was always past methodology that was 5%. On the A&W, they're not recovering 5%. That might be what the property manager is charging, but in this particular case, A&W is only paying 3.3%.
Okay.
Because they're a national account. They can negotiate a better rate.
Thank you, Mr. Leslie. So I think we'll just take a short break between now and our next one. Well, we're going to resume our hearing, and we'll now deal with 651 Stafford Street. When you're ready, you can proceed.
Thank you. Sorry, got a recommendation here.
Okay.
Almost sat down.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Go. Excellent.
Thank you.
So the property is 651 Stafford Street. The roll number is 12011396200. And if you turn to page 8, you get a sense of where this property is, just after the underpass that has just opened up again on Pembina, so Pembina and Stafford. So you can see a little bit more on page 9, as well as page 10 and 11. So it's almost as though there's 3 buildings here. It's been built somewhat piecemeal. If you look on page 9, if you see where it says 653, this is where Long and McQuaid used to be. Long and McQuaid has since moved down Pembina, and they've gotten some new tenants here. There is still a small amount of vacancy, but they have spent money to reconfigure the space. And then as well at where it says 677, that's the Giant Tiger currently. That was the Price Choppers at the reference date, prior to the reference date. And it's since been filled by Giant Tiger, which purchased Price Choppers. And you can see on page 9, that's the physical condition that currently the space where Long McQuaid occupied. So they've had changeover. And so with my recommendation, our rental rates weren't looking bad, so my recommendation is actually pretty straightforward. We are increasing the vacancy to 7%, and that's to recognize that the mall is in transition. Again, 2 major tenants had changed out, and so this gives us a net operating income after the vacancy of $709,887. And just for reference, we won't look at the 2017 mailer just yet, but just for reference, The 2016 mailer had a NOI of $692,000, and the 2015 mailer had an NOI of $744,893. And so the property started experiencing vacancy in 16, and so the number that you see in 16, 692, represents some of that vacancy already. And as you go back, the rates or the net operating income of the property is closer to the 750 range. In the 2017, because the property was in transition, as well as they were spending money to reconfigure the spaces, the net operating income was significantly lower. But I would caution that you wouldn't hang your hat on a single year particularly. You'd want to take a look at what's happening at the property and look at it through time. So if you look at the 2017 mailer in my brief, and you turn to page 21, you can see the landlord's work in the bottom calculations here, the non-operating expense. You can see the landlord's work is $1,870,000, and so that largely represents the expenses that were associated with reconfiguring the spaces, updating the spaces for new tenancies, which have been filled for the most part. So at this point, the vacancy is not a real issue, but because they have been going through vacancy, we consulted our vacancy guideline in our department, and so we've recommended a vacancy allowance of 7%. And the other thing I would point out would be the capitalization rate. So I haven't changed our capitalization rate, but just to expand on it a little bit, we've used 7.8. And if you look at the retail on page 6, our capitalization rates for the retail neighborhood shopping center, again, 7.8 is a pretty favorable cap rate. And this is a property at a good location, albeit the underpass has maybe changed that temporarily, but the construction is complete, and going forward there's no real chronic vacancy issues associated with the property. Again, we've tried to recognize that it is in transition, but it's one of the busiest corners in the city, I would say. And at this point they have national chains and they're pretty much leased up. So we don't think that there's any significant risk associated with the property either. So we've used the model generated cap rate of 7.8. That's my presentation.
Just for clarification before I,
Sure.
you see, it seems to me that the model generated would be a lower cap rate than 7.8. Based on your table on page number
Yeah,
6.
so the on the table 6,
For a neighborhood mall, it seems like the 80th percent would be 7.3.
right,
And you model 7.8.
right. A case could be made for that, but our parameters actually do exceed the 80th percentile.
So long
At our
as
office.
7.8 was modeled, then in spite of,
Correct.
instead of your page number 6.
Correct. Yeah, that's page number 6. Those
Okay.
two columns, the 20th and 80th percentile,
Okay.
relate more to the analysis that was done
Okay.
than to what we are applying.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that before. Commissioners, any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Back to your page 21 of your original submission. And I think a number of times you mentioned, yeah, this property is in transition. So you confirmed that the landlord, according to the 2017 statement, spent $1,870,000.
It would appear so, yes.
And then also, the landlord does not recover the $82,754 in leasing costs on writing new leases.
Correct, and we don't typically, and I believe that there's municipal board precedent for this, but I don't believe we typically include or deduct leasing commissions from the net operating income.
For purposes of assessment.
Correct.
But a potential purchaser might look at properties in transition and say, I'm gonna have these costs in the leasing space.
I think it's typically associated with finding tenants, but I think that's a business decision, the amount of leasing commissions and how that breaks out.
In your recommendation, you increased the vacancy allowance to 7% from, what was the previous was
I believe
4%. Again, to reflect the property in transition, is that correct?
Correct.
And I believe we discussed that currently the property has a vacancy, actual vacancy in excess of 10%, is that right?
For the for the 2018 mailer, it had approximately 10% vacancy, actual vacancy. So actual vacancy versus a vacancy allowance. We differentiate between the two. If a property is 0% vacant, we typically give it a grace of a vacancy allowance. If it's 100% vacant, we usually use a chronic vacancy of 25%. So it's not, we don't typically aim for direct actual vacancy. So in the 2018 mailer, which may include some post-reference information, it's 10%. The 2017 mailer is 8.8%, and we've used 7% vacancy allowance.
Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Leslie. Mr. Upton, do you have any questions of the assessor?
None right now, thank you.
Ms. Madigan, do you have?
No questions.
And I don't either. So, Mr. Leslie, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Leslie, when you're ready, you can proceed.
I apologize again. I prepared a revised submission to reflect some of the discussions that I had with the assessor and also looking at their brief. If we go directly to page 5, this is a workup of the subject property. The first 2 columns are for the reference year. The last few columns are information that was presented at the board of revision and indicating these resulting decisions. The most notable item in the first 2 columns is I've taken out management, the deduction for notional management for 5%, because the property is in transition, and as those leases are being written and paying those significant commissions, which not all deduction, they're recovering the notional 5% management fee, and so we're not claiming that deduction, and that's the major revision. And those first 2 columns, it reflects, the first column reflects a notional 5% vacancy, and the second column is what is the actual income earned by the property, net income, according to the statement. And if you go, you know what, I didn't, it's in my original submission on page 22, I mark it at the top. The page number. This is the income statement that was provided in response to the income and expense questionnaire. It's for the period of January to December 2018, which covers the reference date. And of course, leases would cover that date. Some of that information is post-reference, but if anything, it's more than, the number would be even higher. So you can see total rent revenue, $867,476. That is the number that I've used on page 5. And then in the first column, I've deducted 5% vacancy allowance. And in the actual column, I've used what the actual rent from the vacant space. And again, that number is noted on page 22 under less vacancy and free rent, the 168,056. So I followed the methodology. I've deleted the management, the notional 5% management, and I've arrived at revised net operating income numbers. I've then applied the 8% cap rate, which has been was utilized in the previous reference period. Prior to those two was 8.5%. The price chopper was owned by Safeway. In order to comply with the Competition Bureau award, they sold it to Northwest Company. And Northwest Company operated it for a period of time until they determined that Price Chopper wasn't making any money and converted it into a Giant Tiger. I've taken both those income streams. On the actual, I applied the 8% cap rate, which is consistent with prior years, and I've come up with a value of $7,912,000. To reflect that this property continues to be in transition, to reflect the inordinate amount of money the landlord has had to spend, that I believe a willing buyer would consider, I've used a 9% cap rate.
I've upped the cap rate. And I've come up with a value of $8,580,000. So that's using the notional column and notional deductions, but only a 5% vacancy allowance. Nothing for management, but capping it at 9%. I didn't use the actual for my submission. Actually, in my original submission, I did. You can see it's crossed out. On the first page of my original submission, 7475. I'd use the actual numbers capped at 8%. But I had a deduction for management. Discussions with Mr. Fougere, attempting to try to resolve it. I then reworked the numbers. That 7,000,009 would actually be a reduction from the previous assessment. But interestingly, when I look at it on page 2, the 2016 reference value was also a reduction from the previous assessment. The value of the property was going down. And that's because those were the significant years of the transition. So now we're at a point in time where we have only 10% of the property vacant. The landlord has to spend significant amounts of money, and so I'm trying to come up with a number that reflects what the willing buyer would pay the willing seller, because that's the ultimate objective here. And I can tell you that the willing seller will not accept something less than what it was assessed at before. So that was some of the discussion that we had. I think because of what's transpired over the last 4 or 6 years of transition, that's what led us to the higher cap rate of 9%.
Okay, thank you.
So my submission is $8,580,000.
Okay, let me see that. Any questions of the applicant?
Yes, please. Would you describe the vacancy as a chronic issue at this property? Is it like an ongoing issue that you think is fundamental to the nature of the property?
I can tell you from experience with this particular property, the landlord has a tenant in another property that he would like to move over there. The location is an issue. The issue is, I'm not sure if it has to do with construction of the underpass or it's just the location. You're not far enough south. You're on that border with really, it's difficult to serve anybody south of that market, and the market, there isn't much of a market to the north of it. That's an older area. that's not to say that all the construction doesn't impact that. But when I had a specific discussion with one of his tenants who's located in western Winnipeg, and he wanted to be in the south, to serve the south part of Winnipeg with another store, and he said, no, it's not south enough. So, that's what I can tell you.
Okay. And previous cycles, the cap rate was 8. If we're looking at the previous workups here, 8.5 going further back still, but doesn't seem to have been 9, at least not that we have recorded on your sheet here, though. Is that correct? So you're asking for a higher cap rate than the last few cycles, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Upton, do you have any questions of the applicant?
Your net operating income now is 772,157. Is that what you're asking? You're suggesting?
The model is 772,157. The actual was 632,947.
Net operating income? On your I'm looking at your calculation here. On your
In the first column,
first column,
yeah.
NOI,
So I've got, NOI of 772,157.
right.
So what I've taken is the revenue, the actual revenue less a notional vacancy allowance of 5%, less the vacancy shortfall at 750, less other of 2% to arrive at 772,157. The difference is I've deleted management of 5%.
And the assessor using NOI of 709,887.
Correct.
So your NOI was considerably higher, $65,000 higher or something. You have a higher NOI, but so your difference really you're talking about is the cap rate.
Right.
Cap of 9.
Yeah. But the actual income earned is in the next column. 632,947.
Oh, your calculation of 858, that appears under your first column. Is that? That's what you're asking for, 858?
I'm asking for 858, yes.
At 9% cap, okay, thank you.
Mr. Megan, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Okay, so my question is, you're now asking for 9% cap rate. Before it was 8, and the city actually has a lesser cap rate, but that's neither here nor there. $1,900,000 has been spent on it to revamp it and make it a more modern center.
Right.
And you're saying that, in fact, with the fact that it's been upgraded, it still deserves a higher cap rate than before when it was in transition and needed upgrading. So
Yes.
somebody who's looking at it now, sees the upgrade that's been spent, and looks at it and sees that it's been brought up to date, it's gonna say, in spite of that, I demand a higher cap rate than it had before all this money was spent.
Well, I think the higher cap rate reflects the uncertainty with the property. The fact that it's been spent doesn't mean it won't have to be spent again. I think that's the reality of the retail market.
Although you see that better tenants have come in now, you have Dollarama, which is a pretty good tenant, there's a Northwest company with a giant Tiger store, and along with Quaid's just a local market, you've now got national leases there.
Okay, well, let's talk about Dollarama.
Yeah.
Where does Dollarama get all their product
Well,
from?
it's actually not Dollarama, it's Dollar Tree.
Dollar Tree,
Yeah.
which is a competitor of Dollarama. Their American operation.
Right.
Dollarama was started in Quebec. So, but both of them get all their product from China. That's going to be continuing to be a significant issue. If they can't get their product, how do they sell it?
Well, you know, things are being diverted to Vietnam, and who's to say that we're not, and Canada is not affected by Mr. Trump's trade wars.
And so that, and I think that's what you're seeing, you know, who would think that Sears would go out of business? The Target would only spend a couple of years here. There's a lot of uncertainty in the retail
And
market.
that would apply to any center everywhere with any lease. So that you're saying that basically every shopping center should have a 9% cap rate because there's uncertainty in the market. Not this, just this one.
Well, I'm suggesting that, yes, where you have a situation where you have a property that has suffered significant uncertainty, that it should reflect a higher cap rate. What the department does is it looks at sales in the marketplace to apply those cap rates.
You haven't got any sales for us here. You're just basically saying that because of the situation, you think, and it's conjecture, that purchasers can demand a 9% cap rate to buy this mid-center.
That's right, because that's the objective, is to what a willing buyer would pay a willing seller. We don't have a sale. But on my page 2 of my original brief, I provide a history of the subject property. The second page. This property's been before the Board of Revision virtually every year since the 2003 reference year. This is, my client says, you must be in partnership with the City of Winnipeg Assessment Department, because you have to represent me on this particular property every time. Well, that's because this property is not like, and so all the other properties, so that you can just take those cap rates and apply it and say, well, no, this is what it should be assessed at. You have to look at this specific property because of its location, because of its tenants, because of the situation it's in, and because we have a Board of Revision that's to look at those issues. That's why there's an application made every reference date.
Okay, thank you. Do you want a summation or?
Just quickly to pick up on something that you had mentioned, the $1,870,000 that they had put into the property. So that was for 1 year. This transition has spanned a couple of years, and you can see in Mr. Leslie's brief on page 25, his original submission, the 2018 submission mentions landlord's work, again, page 25. Landlord's work of $1,218,446. So it's a transition. It's not sort of a one-off. It was over the span of a few years, and that's again what.
So you're clarifying that over $3 million has been spent rather than what I had indicated.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't have that total figure, but.
Anything summation? Basically, anything you've already said, we're aware of. You don't have to repeat it.
Yes.
If there's something new that has come up, please bring to our attention.
I would just refer to the assessor's submission, and if you use an 8% cap, which has been used in the prior years, then you get a number of $8,875,000.
Okay.
That's my submission.
Thank you. Okay, so we now have item number 8. That's the last matter on the agenda. That is 850 Keewatin Street. And we're ready when you are.
Okay, I do have a recommendation for this one as well. I just have to locate it.
Okay.
Sorry.
So yeah.
Paper clip got stuck to another page. Oh. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Okay, Shane, you ready?
So the property that we're looking at is 850 Keewatin Street. The roll number is 14097285000. And we have photographs on page 8. The top aerial picture here, it's on the west side. And you can see here on the bottom picture, there's a Safeway and a Liquor Mart. There's also a Toronto Dominion Bank, as well as another Dollar Tree. You can see on page 9, there's some more pictures a little bit closer up of the property. And so, for my recommendation, I'm proposing that we use actuals across the mall, with the exception of the Safeway. The Safeway has been there for a long time, and the actual rent that they pay is in the range of $7 a square foot. $7.50 a square foot. So they've renewed throughout the years. I would imagine that that's the lease. I don't have this information, but you know, from the 80s, 90s, a bygone era. So the $7.50 doesn't represent market rent. So in place of the $7.50, we're using $11 for the Safeway, and then $5 for the mezzanine on the Safeway. And so, other properties on this docket today we've been discussing, if you recall, 1881 Portage Avenue is a Family Foods. They pay $11 a square foot, and they're not Safeway. And in fact, that used to be a Safeway. So I would argue that $11 should be your starting point. Again, that would be a comparable 1881 Portage Family Foods at $11. Also on this docket was Stafford, we just discussed. The Price Choppers / Giant Tiger, they continued their lease. They were paying $11 as well. So we feel that $11 is fair of a grocery store rate. And so just to give you some more comparables on page 3 of my brief, so the table at the bottom, this is all grocery stores. So we're looking at a Safeway. I want to point your attention to the Sobeys that is across the street. So on page 8, the building sort of mirror imaging the subject property is a Sobeys. Since Sobeys and Safeway merged, Sobeys has decided to vacate that premise. I believe because of the or the competition laws, I should say, because they're right across the street. However, even though they don't operate there, they've chosen to continue to pay the lease. So they've renewed the lease at a higher rate. So if you look on my page 3, the first comparable, 817 Keewatin, that's the Sobeys. So they're paying $16 a square foot to have a vacant building across from their own grocery store. So the original rate was $14 for that grocery store across the street, virtually the same location as the subject. Arguably, the subject should be at $14. But they've chosen to renew the lease even though they are no longer there at $16 a square foot. And we're proposing 11 for the Safeway that is occupied, because we think that's a fair rate. And if you look at it in Sobeys / Safeway's perspective, if they have these two grocery stores of similar quality, one has a leasehold interest signed at $7.50, and there's an agreement to renew it versus a lease that's at $14, even though now they're paying for both of them. They would choose the cheaper of the two for longer term tenancies. And that difference in value between the $7.50 and the $11 is the leasehold interest in the property. And market indicates, as we can see at our comparables, that the rates are higher than that. There's a couple that I want to point out beyond those that I have already. The second one, 1051 Winnipeg Avenue, is somewhat close by. It's an ethnic food store, an ethnic grocery store. So they pay $19 a square foot. The same tenant actually at 1303 Jefferson pays $8.50. So there is a range, but I would suggest to you that the Jefferson property is a local tenant of poorer quality. It's a space that was previously another grocery store. And so I would suggest that while there is a range, they are trying to fill that space there, and that's also a somewhat close by grocery store. But if you look at them two together, $19 and $8.50, I think coming in at $11 for a Safeway is reasonable. And again, they're paying $16 across the street to have a vacant grocery store.
Just for further clarification, what is the term on this lease with Safeway? When does it expire?
I'm not entirely sure when it expires, actually. So it doesn't seem to have an expiry date.
Okay.
If you look on page 16, it's not listed with an expiry date. Whereas you can see above the Manitoba Liquor Commission has a 5-year lease. Sorry, 15-year lease. 15-year lease.
Okay,
So, and outside of that, we've used the parameters, the regular city parameters for neighborhood shopping center.
thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Leslie, questions?
Yes. So, we will deal with the Safeway to begin with. So on your page 3, you noted that the Sobeys across the street, the start date, which is dark, the start date is the 1st of June 2016 and runs for 5 years.
Correct.
And it's possible that they renewed that lease sometime in 15?
I don't know the date that it was renewed. My understanding was they renewed it, for what this is worth as verbal evidence. My understanding is they renewed it so that outside competitors such as Save On Foods couldn't come in and put in their grocery store in that location.
Okay. And the Safeway at the current location binds the landlord to a contract rate of $7.50. So a buyer of the property,
We got your question right now. That's an argument that you make.
okay.
If you want to pose
okay,
this as a
sorry.
question, I'll let you do so.
Okay,
But certainly, you're going to have a time to do submission after, Mr. Leslie.
but you've used an $11 rate.
Correct.
Okay. And then on the rest of the, are the rest of the rents the actual rent?
Correct.
So on the income side, the only issue really is $3.50 square foot on the Safeway. Roughly, forget about the $5 for the mezzanine. I always have to take one of you guys upstairs to show them that it actually does exist. Not that it's ever used for anything.
Right. I believe through discussions with you that that's our, on the large area of the Safeway, that's the difference between
Right.
our
And,
income.
and then the overall cap rate you've used is 7.3%.
Correct.
And so, would you suffice to say that the difference between our submissions is the Safeway and the cap rate?
Correct.
That's my submission.
Thank you. Unless you submit, that's your questions.
I'm sorry, that's my question.
Your submissions will come. Mr. Up, any questions of the
No
assessor?
questions.
Mr. Manager?
No questions.
Okay, so this is something that I think is going to come up, so I want to ask you now, and that's the mezzanine area. How does the city, is it used for anything at this point?
This particular mezzanine, I cannot say that I know if it's being used. Typically, just in terms of the layout of grocery stores, I'm familiar that often there's change rooms, the security camera room is up there, the manager's office, lunchroom, things like that, locker rooms, yeah.
Be used for storage as well?
Potentially, yeah. This,
Are they used for storage, or is there like an elevator that?
not
What is
a
it?
significant amount of storage. Usually there's racking at the back of the store that's used for storage.
Okay. So how does the city attribute a value for these things that are not rented and it's occupied?
Right.
I'm just wondering how you get the 5%, or the
On-
$5 a foot.
Unofficially, we look at somewhere in around half of the grocery store rent. to say that there is value in the mezzanine space.
And you know, in this case, is the mezzanine space actually being paid for?
Pardon me?
Is the mezzanine space actually being paid for by?
Not separate.
Then it's not, so it's basically included then in the base rent they're already paying.
Correct.
So the nice reasonable rent that they're paying for the ground floor also includes this mezzanine at no charge.
Right.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So envision this property is 1979. I believe it has a $50-year lease, 5-year renewals. Renewals have to happen well in advance. These were the Safeways that were built. They looked like Gullwing or something like that, or Pagoda. And at the back of the store, actually, if you've ever been in Corden Village Mall, that was a Safeway. And at the back, at the very back, if you go through to the very back of that mall and go to where the washrooms are, there's a door, and if you go up through that door, if you have a key or access, you go up a staircase, and up the staircase, another door, and then there's a mezzanine that's built up there. And on the assessor's workup, it's 1,402 square feet. It was washrooms, lunchroom, lockers. I don't know if there was a manager's office up there one time. It's not, most places it's not used other than for storage. I know at Bernstein's, the owner, that's all they use it for is storage. The as far as I know, the Safeway on Q8 does not use it for anything. But we're not gonna argue about the $5 rate that's attached to it.
Okay.
The real issue is the $7.50 a square foot rate that the landlord is contracted to receive from Safeway. You know, if I just take $3.50 times 38,942, that's another $136,297. Forget about any deductions and just divide that by the cap rate of 7.3%. That's $1,867,000. I don't know when Sobeys renewed the lease across the street. That's a Shindigo property. And I don't know what the terms of the lease when they had to renew it. But the assessor has stated that he's heard word of mouth that the reason is so that they don't have competition. I don't know that. They may have renewed the lease before they were told by the Competition Bureau that they had to close one of the 2 stores. And of course, if you're paying $7.50 a square foot versus only
So at the time it was $14.
$14, you're gonna reporting to your shareholders, you're going to renew the cheaper rent. But we're not talking about the property across the street, we're talking about the subject property. And
Well, just as a comparable rent though. I think that
a
it is
comparable
Yeah,
rent.
I think it is a comparable rent.
But
That's right across the street, I think that's.
Right, but the objective is what a willing buyer is gonna pay the willing seller. And if you're bound by that $7.50, willing buyer is going to discount the price accordingly because he can't get market rent.
Of course you
Because the alternative is it goes dark. And what if it goes dark? Well, 40,000 square foot tenants aren't as prominent anymore as they used to be. And they also run the risk of going out of business. So,
Okay, so basically, I think the basic argument is that you should be looking at the actual receipt, because anybody buying it's gonna look at that lease, it's tied in for a long time, they're gonna cap it, and the city's attribution to this property is pie in the sky, they wouldn't get it, and this property is less value because it's got a less valued lease, it's gonna go on for a long time.
and the cap rate will reflect that. I have used in my submission, and here is my revised.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
So if we go to, I think I excluded some pages, but I believe it's marked as page 7.
Yes, it is, we wrote up.
Yeah. So I've revised the numbers. The revisions, these are based on actual rents as reported. The Safeway represents $292,065 annually of net rent. I've revised the management deduction for those, according to the rent roll, that I believe that they're actually recovering the management fee. They don't recover anything from Safeway on the 5% management fee. So I've left that deduction in. And then I've taken those two income streams and for some other tenants, they're not recovering any of that 5% management fee because the leases during the reference date didn't include that provision. And I've taken those two income streams and capped them at 7.75% to arrive at a revised value of $10,041,000. I believe the Safeway lease with the renewals runs to 2029. On page 2 of my original submission, I provide a bit of history on the subject property. This goes back to the 1999 reference year. So the issue, and I, Mr. Chairman, I believe you have it right on. Do we use a notional rate for the Safeway at $11, or do we use the bound contract rate? And that bound contract rate appears to be impacted by what Safeway Sobeys is doing across the street. They're not gonna let anybody come around. And so is a buyer going to, in looking at purchasing the property, going to recognize that in the purchase price by increasing the cap rate?
Okay. Questions?
Yes, so you referred to the $11 that I'm using as a nominal rate. What do you think the fair market value for a grocery store would be? So you've mentioned the $7.50 is the contract rent signed 40 years ago. What do you think the rate, fair market value rate would be on a grocery store?
I don't know. I think it depends on the location.
So on the location, so across the street, the lease was $14 when it was operating as a Sobeys. So that's as close as you could get with the location. Would you agree that we're after fair market value? That we're doing like a fee simple, looking for fair market value for this property?
I see what you're doing. Now, you could use the $11 rate and then bump up the cap rate even more. So if we're bound by fee simple, say, no, you have to use market rates, you can't use the contract rates.
So
Then I would just say, well then, because again, I go back to what the willing buyer is gonna pay the willing seller, and he says, well, the market rate might be $11. 14 across the street, but that was new construction. And new construction compared to 1979 construction is light years away.
would it be fair to say that they've updated this building since '79?
They changed it to what they call their lifestyle.
Okay.
Whether they upgraded the efficiency of the building, I don't know.
So if the property were to come onto the market in 9 years versus in, say, 11 years, would there be like a artificial $3 million difference in the price because the lease has finished its terms?
If
Because it would seem to be a good investment if somebody bought it right before the lease expired.
if they could see that opportunity, but not only the opportunity, but they had a tenant that was gonna occupy 30,000 square feet. But I can tell you on.
Well, we're looking
when
across the
we're talking about
street.
comparable properties, we couldn't find a tenant for 3045 Nest to go into the old Safeway. And we
That's-
had no restricted covenant on there.
And that's a building that hasn't been upgraded, I would argue, but,
No, they had
Across the
changed that to the lifestyle.
You know, I think this is not taking us anywhere.
Okay.
We hear your argument, okay?
fair,
Yeah.
fair, thank you.
Anything else?
No, thank you, that's good.
Okay, Mr. Upton, any questions?
Yeah, you're asking for a 7.75 cap on this one?
If we use the actual rent on the Safeway.
On the 7.75 cap. Let's see,
Yeah,
on
if
7.5.
if we're bound to use a notional rate, then I would ask for a higher cap rate. Because I think the buyer is gonna ask for a higher cap rate. If they're bound, if I'm gonna be short, $3.50 times 39,000, 38,942. If I'm gonna be short $136,000 a year in value, I'm gonna build that into the price.
And how did you determine the 7.75? You used it before in other properties, but.
It was used before in other, it seemed to be, and it's been, I think we've heard that number today, 7.75, so it's in the marketplace.
Okay.
It's just that it reflects the actual rent on the Safeway.
Thank you.
Mr. McIntyre?
No questions.
Okay, so basically, I want to see where you're going. So this is the way I see it. So you're saying they're only getting, was it $7?
And 50 cents.
And 50 cents. And anybody buying this property is gonna look at that and they're gonna then cap it, and they're gonna say, this is what I require because this lease is forever, and it's might have been a bad investment or a bad decision made by management of this shopping center to lock into such a long lease at such a low rate, but albeit that's gonna reflect on the purchase price, correct?
I'm
Yeah,
not,
but we're
I'm
pushing
not
the buy.
certain, but that rate might even be higher than what it was originally.
Okay, and, well, and you're also, I mean, across the street, they're now paying $16, which would include, if you took the city's notional $11 and $5 to the mezzanine, would be $16 a foot, just like what they're paying across the street.
Can I just intervene for just a moment? So the $5 for the mezzanine is just for a very small portion.
Oh, I see.
So effectively, the
Oh.
overall rate would be like 1107 or something
Oh,
like
so
that.
it's that small?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's on the assessor's recommendation, it's 1,402 square feet,
Okay,
and so,
yeah. Okay, but isn't it, if they did make a bad management decision by locking this long lease, should the taxpayer bear that burden? I mean, should we still look at the fair market value and make a determination of the assessment on that basis and using comparative rents, and not look at the bad decision the management's made?
well, is it a bad management decision?
Well, it might be at this stage. It certainly looks like it in retrospect, at least. But right now,
But
it certainly is now.
But is it, if it goes dark,
Okay, well, but the city's compared all kinds of other comparable spaces that have much higher rents. Do you have others that are lower to show us that, showing that it's a reasonable rent?
the Ness Avenue was lower before they closed it, and now it's demolished and was sold as a vacant lot.
Yeah, because, it was basically.
So there's the
Then we're
predicament.
looking at land value, though. We're looking at here,
Right,
market rate.
but it's enjoying 200, in my submission, it's enjoying the benefit of getting the rent plus a contribution to common taxes. The property across the street not only renews its lease and pays $14 a foot or $16 a foot, but it's also paying common taxes. The landlord doesn't care, they're
No.
getting the rent.
Right.
And so a buyer comes along and says, I'm gonna buy this property and the property across the street is gonna be forever dark.
Well, a buyer, and you're saying that the management doesn't care, but they might care, because a Safeway or another store pulls people into the mall. It's actually, it's something that gravitates people to the mall, they'll do business with other businesses in the mall when it has a grocery store.
Well, actually, the draw on this property is the liquor store,
Okay,
it's not the Safeway.
okay, well, thank you for answering the questions. We'll make our determination and you'll hear from us, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.